Hey everyone, welcome back to First Time in the Ring, the podcast made for beginner showmen, parents, and anyone else trying to figure out the livestock world one step at a time. Today, we're talking about what to do when you first bring your lamb home. When you first get a project, it can honestly feel very overwhelming. Everyone around you seems like they already know what they're doing, and meanwhile, you're just hoping that you're feeding enough food so it makes wait and time. But today, we're breaking it all down, from first bringing your lamb home to what to do right after you. Today, I'm joined by Austin Evans, who has years of experience showing sheep and working with lambs. We're going to walk through what he wishes that he knew when he started. So let's get into it.
My name is Austin Evans, and I'm 21 years old. I'm an agricultural education major from West Texas A&M University, and I mainly shown sheep.
Since I started for age, so that would have been the 4th grade. So probably like 10, 12 years.
So we're talking about what you do when you first bring home an animal and what to do right when you get your lamb. So what is the very first thing you do when you bring a lamb home?
The first thing that we do is leave them alone for a couple days just to get in their environment. And since they're sheep and they're kind of anxiety stricken, they always need to know what's going on if you can provide it. So just letting them alone in their pen for the first few days to let them adjust to their new environment. Obviously feeding them, but aside from that's the first thing we're going to do.
And then after they get that lamb home, what should somebody be looking for right after they bring it home? Like just animal health, like if they're adapting well, just anything. If you're like, oh, something's off with that lamb, like how would you know something's off with them?
So sometimes a lot of animals in general will get like a snotty nose. I know a lot of 4-H kids that I work with freak out when they see a snotty nose. Sometimes they'll get a snotty nose, and whether it's dust or whether it's just a new change in the environment or whether they've been hauled a long time. So I think watching that clear up, but also making sure it's not like colored snot, but it's like clear snot is a big difference and big telltale sign that yes, they've been hauled, but that should go away.
What does your lamb setup look like? What would be the best setup for an animal?
This is a hard question because a lot of people don't have, everybody's situation is different. I'm just going to share what my setup was. We initially built a show barn for our steers, and while in the off season was when I had my sheep. And so we built pens, like individual pens. I think there was the big barn, you walked in and a sliding door in the middle, and then it had 4 or 5 pens on each side. And so we would put each individual sheep in there in each pen by themselves, and then they had a hay feeder, and then they had their grain feeder.
And then thinking back to your time showing, what are some of the mistakes that you would make whenever you first started? Like whenever you first brought home an animal and stuff?
I think a lot of people overlook the leaving them alone. I know people or kids are excited to get into it and start working with their project, but the best thing you can do is leave them alone for a little bit. And then another thing is right when we wean those sheep, because we also raise sheep. So right when we wean those sheep, or right when you get that sheep, you need to shear the baby wool off if it hasn't been off already, because that just accelerates their growth and how much they're gaining per day.
Okay. And then, so you said that you would leave your animal alone for a few days. Like how many days would that be?
Yeah. So if you bring them home is a different story than just moving them pens, like if you raise sheep, but leaving them alone for at least 2 days to be able to get adjusted to their environment. And then you can start going in there and culture breaking and stuff like that. And then I recommend getting that baby wool off pretty soon just so they start growing.
So after you do start working with them after a few days, what would your daily routine look like?
You really don't touch their body unless they've got like fungus or something, but typically you shouldn't have fungus. Washing the legs once a week, and then every day we go in there, we'll rinse legs and then condition them with mane and tail, the texturizer conditioner, and then putting their like leg shag grower stuff, because I know there's lots of parts on the markets. People have to do their research on which one they want to use, but putting that in there and then letting it sit for a few minutes and then blowing that out and wrapping legs again, making sure the legs are completely dry before you put those leg wraps on, because I've had it happen before when I was little. Those sheep will shed or check their leg wool and it's not good.
And then do you want to explain what like wrapping lamb's legs are and like what products do we recommend? What that all does?
Yeah, we wrap sheep legs. It's just like a felt. There's lots of different brands out there. The ones we typically use are the Rural Supplements wraps, the mega ones, just because they're so easy. Rural Supplements is so easy to work with and they come really quickly, but also they're a quality product that doesn't fall off. The Velcro is good. And so you just start at the bottom and then work your way up to the top. And it's just covering that leg wool so they can't pick at it, because a lot of sheep get bored in their pen and they want to sit there and pick at their leg wool. And so that's what covers their leg wool so they can pick up.
And then why would you want a lamb to have leg wool? What's the purpose behind it and all that?
Yeah, so the purpose behind leg wool or leg shag is being able to, it gives the illusion that the sheep is bigger boned than it really is. And so it's become a trend. I would say when I started, it was a trend, but we've gotten shaggier and shaggier as I've started. And it just gives the illusion that that sheep is bigger boned and more powerful than it might be.
So a lot of people go through and they see all of these show feeds and supplements that that and they're just all being thrown at them, what would you recommend for someone who is just starting nutrition wise on how to feed their animal?
My biggest piece of advice is to ask your breeder what they were feeding or what they recommend, because they know what works best with their genetics. And like you said, there's a lot of different type of feeds and supplements that you don't need every supplement at the store because they start to counteract with each other. And so just asking your breeder and asking, hey, what would you recommend? What should this lamb be at? Some knowledge of nutrition is good, like what kind of feed or what kind of poundage to start them at and like how much you want them to gain. But at the same time, being able to ask your breeder and getting a basis for what you should be feeding, because ultimately at the end of the day, they're going to notice.
And then, so I know a lot of people struggle with trying to get their lamb to eat enough so that they gain enough weight for whatever fair is that's coming up. What's a recommendation? So if you were trying to get your lamb to eat more, what would you do?
When we're feeding sheep is I tell the kids aggressive when they're eating. So almost to the point, not that they're choking, but being able, like they will clean it within the first 5 minutes that you put it in front of them. And so a lot of mistakes that people initially make is they just want to throw in the feed and then they want to leave it for the rest of the day. And then that creates a really slow, nonchalant eater that they'll just nibble on it throughout the day. And so I think the biggest part of getting those sheep to eat is put that feed in, let it sit, and then pull it out of their pen and take the feed away. You can leave hay, but taking the grain away makes them more aggressive and want to feed.
And then there's this big thing going on with hay as well, that some people feed hay, some people don't. What are your thoughts on that?
I've had a lot of different experiences with all different kinds of opinions. Personally, we fed half and half alfalfa, half grass hay, and we just keep their feeders full all the time, because I believe that if you give them the chance to have the hay belly, then you're not going to have a belly on the morning of the show because they're rumen and their gut's already used to it. But I also know other people that just give basketball or softball sizes of hay per feeding, and that's all they do. So it's really up to going back to the breeder and asking them what their sheep does best on.
Yeah, see, I always went through and I would give like handfuls of hay whenever I fed them because they're still a ruminant and they still need hay. That's what a lot of people I feel like they miss, is that they're like, oh, it's just an animal, and they don't consider like it has a rumen.
Yeah, there are people out here that think that we shouldn't feed these sheep any hay the day they're ruminants, and so being able to grow and have a healthy gut is really important.
What are common health problems that you see in lambs whenever people bring them home? What are some of the most common ones?
I think kids bring their lambs home don't know that sheep need to be wormed every 21 days. And so a common problem will be that you see these sheep with worm bellies, or they're not getting the weight that they need to. It's probably because they've got kids worm. Every time we rotate the color of the wormer. So we would do sidectin on the first 21 days and then rotate to valbazen. And we typically in our, we're making sure we cover big scope parasites or internal worms that sheep get.
So fungus is a really big problem that a lot of kids run into, and they either don't know what it is, or they know what it is and they just don't know how they got it or how to prevent it. So how can you detect fungus, and then how do they get it, and how can they prevent it or treat it?
Yeah, so fungus is ringworm essentially. And so ringworm spreads between cross-contamination, and even like birds will get a hold of or something in the barn and they can pass it on to other sheep in the barn. So I think the biggest thing about fungus or ringworm is that kids cross-contaminate at the shows, rubbing up on each other's or rubbing up on another exhibitor's lamb, or the judge handling all the lambs in the show, or even just dragging your hose across that sheep at the wash rack can get you fungus. And so being able to have good biosecurity protocols even when you're at the show, but also taking those steps to prevent it. You need a fungus protocol when you show sheep. So typically what that looks like is using a product called Ring Out. It's just a shampoo that prevents and kills anything that they've got or could have got. It's not 100%, but having a protocol is better than none. Typically with that Ring Out, we'll bring sheep home, and the second they get off the trailer, we wash them with it and then recondition their hide. And then we'll flip around the next day and do the same thing. The other big part about that is actually putting something on their hide to recondition it, because when we pull off that wool, it takes all the lanolin out of it. And so that's how they get fungus, is a dry hide.
To prevent fungus, you want to keep your hide conditioned. How do you keep your hide conditioned? What does that mean exactly? And what does that feel like? What does it look like? And how do you do it?
The best example I can give for kids that have never shown would be like your skin. Typically, I use Revive, and it's a solvent supply product, or some type of hide lotion, whether that's the Cornhuskers lotion that people use from Walmart. Most of these big show brands now are creating their own hide lotion. I know Weaver has one. I know Solvent Supply has one. Just reconditioning that so it doesn't get dry and crusty, but also creating a barrier between the inside and the outside.
Okay. And then is there anything else you want to add that's like about bringing your animal home or anything else like that?
Yeah, I think clean water is really important too. I think a lot of kids don't understand that sheep are really picky. And so the typical rule of thumb that we use is if you wouldn't drink out of that bucket, then they probably wouldn't either. So having like a water bottle brush in your barn and cleaning those, at least scrub. You don't have to use soap, but cleaning those buckets out of all the algae and stuff and changing them at least once a day is really beneficial in their weight gain and their overall health.
And then is there anything else?
When we bring them home, we give a shot of Dectomax. It's a warmer. It's an injectable warmer. It's not labeled for sheep, but you give 1 cc and it covers anything from the eye roundworms, lungworms, eye worms, and then the big ones are the sucking lice, the biting lice, and the mange mites. It's actually for their leg wool and it helps prevent those. It's just taking another step in your leg shag health so they don't lose it or get any mites like that. Because we can't control it in the bedding, so we'll control it on the animal. Another thing is people haven't showed sheep before, I don't think they realize that sheep are pretty stupid, and being able to have a clean and safe pen ready for them is very important. So things like common mistake I'll see is people get the hanging wire or rope like hay feeders, and people will hang those up for the sheep, and then they'll come out the next morning and their sheep has hung itself because it got tangled up in it. So just minimizing all those hazards. And then I do recommend a gut health product. So if you don't want to feed a supplement, that's fine, but I think you should give a gut health product. Some ones that come to the top of my head, like Rule Supplements has the formula, and it's just like a probiotic gut health supplement, or it's called Cornerstone. It's actually got melatonin in it, but I think Johnston Club Lambs makes that one, or that's who came up with it. And so giving a gut health product, because sheep's guts are smaller and they're really finicky, so keeping that as consistent as possible. And then I was looking at these Stock Show Secrets posts. One thing it talks about is connect with a veterinarian, meaning don't go in without a game plan. If you're going to bring home a sheep, I recommend a good sheep vet, but I know a lot of people don't have that. And so finding a vet that you can consult to when things go wrong, because again, they're really little and finicky. And so being able to be preventative, but also taking care of it quickly is important, because typically, not that I've had a lot of sheep die, but when you see a sheep down, it's probably too late. So you've got to stay ahead of it. Another thing is for these younger kids, planning your shows and your goals each year. It also helps with feeding too, like knowing where they're going to end up at is really important for your overall goal and nutritional strategy. I always tell kids to set goals because nobody's going to walk in the first time and win the show. So being able to not get discouraged, but being able to set goals and accomplish those one at a time. I want to talk about what equipment these kids may need the first time they start a project, because when I was little, I would look through the whole Sullivan supply book and I thought that I needed every single thing that was on there, but that's typically not the case. And also, I know a lot of families are as fortunate as others. And so making a plan of what equipment you're going to get and what equipment you can have on your wish list is really important. So making sure you have a halter, a good halter. I know people use different halters. There's the chain halters and there's the rope halters. Typically, I use the ski ropers to break sheep in, and then if their halter broke, we'll put them on a chain halter because that chain tends to rub on their chain a lot. And then making sure you have a slicker or wool card because you'll need that at the show. And then I know people think they need blowers, but if you're really serious about it, get a blower. But if not, then there's dog blowers, there's leaf blowers. You'd be surprised the amount of things that people use for blowers, because I know $400 or $500 isn't always as affordable as some people like to think they are. And also use the senior clean outs as well. Being able to find things for cheap on Facebook Marketplace is really great. And just watching at the end of the show season or end of your show season when these seniors are cleaning out their barn is also a way I get most of my equipment. I do recommend a sheep fitting stand. I think that's really important just to keep your sheep still. And if you're really serious about working legs, then you're going to need one. It prevents you from bending down and making your back tired and sore. I'm really tall, and so a sheep stand is a necessity. And I want to touch on one other thing that I thought of when I was talking about this. In order to build leg shag, you don't have to brush it every single day. So one mistake I see is that kids will take their slicker, their wool card, and they're brushing those legs every day. When you brush those legs, that's pulling out more leg wool than it's pulling dead and live hair out. And so if I have to brush it all, I go to Walmart and I get one of those wet brushes that are labeled for ladies, and being able to use that to brush your legs if you need to or work in the product is okay, but using your hands is probably better than any brush that you could use.
And then one last thing I wanted to touch on is when you very first start working with your animal, you have to show this lamb without a halter, without anything. And how do you teach a lamb to do all those things?
My biggest piece of advice for that is kids will use their halter as a safety for a long time, but the sooner you take that halter off and the sooner you get it to walk, the better. Some sheep are better than others, but if you lose your lamb and he runs back to the barn, that's fine. It's not the end of the day. Because I'd rather have kids lose their lamb and us catch it without a halter than staying safe and using the halter the whole time. When you're going to lead that lamb, kids try to get in the front of their lamb as they're leading it. And so staying to the side or behind that front shoulder is much better than trying to get in front of their space, because they don't like their space being intruded, especially when they're trying to go somewhere. And so allowing those sheep to see where they're going and staying out of their vision, staying out of their, like, where they're trying to go, keeps those sheep to walk better.
Yeah, with that, the one thing I always think about is that a lot of kids, whenever they let go of their lambs and they get away, they just give up. And the only thing is don't give up, because if you give up, they learn that if they get away, they're done.
Yeah, so obviously we're not teaching these sheep to get loose, but if you lose your sheep once, that's fine. But you can't let him go back to the barn and go in his pen, because they're animals, and so they learn from repeated behavior. And keeping them, like, you have to go catch that lamb and at least take him back out for 10 minutes to teach him that it's not okay to just run back to the barn. And if I go back to the barn, I get in my pen.
And then what is some stuff that you wish you were told when you first started showing?
Some advice I give is that this deal is pretty tough. There's always going to be a sheep that somebody paid more money for. And I can think back to my show career when we had paid a few $1,000s for this wether, and we walked in and got beat by a lamb that was sired by, or a $21,000 lamb that some people from Texas bought. And so just knowing that at the end of the day, it's also just one judge's opinion on a certain day. And so just knowing that you're not going to win every time, and that my ag advisor, who's now passed away, used to tell me that your championship win comes from two things. And most of that is luck, but the other part of it is putting in the work. So you can't expect to win without a little bit of luck, but also working hard.
Yeah, I always tell kids, focus on showmanship, especially when they're first starting. Get your showmanship down, and then you can get into more expensive animals, but start with showmanship, because once you're good at that, then it's worth, when you buy those more expensive animals, they're worth it. Thank you guys so much for listening to this episode of First Time in the Ring. And a huge thank you to Austin for coming on and sharing his experience and advice. If there's one thing I hope you take away from this episode, it's that nobody has everything figured out. And that is okay. Showing livestock is something you learn by doing, asking questions, and just continuing to show up every day. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to follow the podcast, share it with another showman or parent, and check out First Time in the Ring socials for more beginner-friendly tips and content. And remember, everyone starts somewhere. We'll see you next time.